The second consideration is the initiation strategy, or how the network is going to get started in the first place, how to kickstart it. The first and easiest way to kickstart is through money. You just use money. It's very simple, but sometimes it's ineffective. And the problem is, if you run into a budgetary problem down the line, your network might crumble. The second option is rhetoric. This happens in cases where you have a charismatic politician or a group of organizations that get together and put a theme in the press or in the public. For example, a campaign about teen pregnancy can, if it's a coordinated campaign, can sort of jumpstart a network. Like local organizations, schools, and might start working together to achieve this common goal of reducing teen pregnancy. Another way is to convene, or we refer to the capacity of an agency or an organization to convene partners together. We saw that at the Coventry Safety Partnership, for example, when the local governments were able to get the police and some other local organizations to start collaborating together, because before they were doing complementary tasks but were not talking to one another. So that's the capacity to convene. You can jumpstart network using people and technology resources. Coventry is another example. The Coventry Safety Partnership is another example where the city could use a number of different agencies, from garbage collection to street cleaning to actual policemen and firefighters. All together, they would occupy the entire city, and working together, they would be able to report incidents and make sure to be proactive to reduce the crime rate. So that's a good example. Another example is if you have a very good technological infrastructure or databases or something, you can start your network. The last one is starting a network through government authority. So what you do there is the state or local governments can nominate certain groups or certain people, thus giving them legitimacy. For example, a neighborhood crime watch program where the police would designate a group of citizens to be in charge of the program, and this would empower them to then meet with the community, to create relationships, and to actually go and knock on people's door. If you go and knock on people's door without the backing of the state, you might get a very different response. The third consideration in designing a network is to choose the right partners. Now, in choosing the right partners, you first look at cultural compatibility. So if you're trying to deliver some services and your goal is to cut costs, you might choose a very different partner than if your goal is to increase quality. So we have to be mindful of that cultural compatibility here. The second is operational capacity. That's usually the one that's used the most, and that's the more intuitive criteria is the cost. How much is the state expected to pay for the service? Does the provider have specialized expertise? Does the provider have sufficient financial viability, not only to run the day-to-day operations and the investment needed to provide the services, but also financial viability to assume some of the risk, because you don't want to get into a situation where the state designs, contracts out with partners, yet retains all the risk, and through pricing and contracts channels all the profits to the private partners. So one of the partners here in the network needs to assume some risk to make sure the interests of all parties are aligned. The last of the criteria you look at in order to choose the right partner is the proximity to the customer. Do these partners have ties with community centers or neighborhoods, and are they seen as legitimate partners in their group or their milieu? For example, if you're trying to design a program to provide information or engage a number of people from an ethnic or religious group, you will try to target or choose partners from that ethnic or religious group that have ties in the milieu. Else, you might actually fail. The third criteria you need to look at when choosing the right partners is the proximity to the customer. So you look at whether the partners have sufficient ties or legitimacy with the people you're trying to reach. So if you're trying to reach the members of an ethnic or religious group, you should choose an organization that has a good standing with them to facilitate the communication. The fourth point in designing a network, the fourth consideration to design a network is to determine the right type of network. And so far we've talked about networks in a very theoretical way, a web of partners and so on, but there's specific types, and we give 6, in the literature that we reviewed gave 6, but it's not necessarily an exhaustive list. And we give them by decreasing order of government involvement. So the one where the government is involved the most is a service contract. When the government purchases supplies, it can be one-off, it can be like on a yearly basis, but still it's a fairly simple network, yet the government is a lot involved in just acquiring goods and services. The second is supply chain. It's most often seen in the private sector in car manufacturing, but on the government side, you could have a big supply chain to produce military equipment, when you have a lot of components that are built around the world and assembled in the home country to create fighter jets or other heavy equipment. Third type of network is a so-called ad hoc network. These would be set up in reaction to a crisis like SARS or a tsunami. And as in the case of SARS in Singapore, they can then become they can become a non-ad hoc network and sort of become permanent. You have channel partnerships as a fourth type of network. An example of that is motor registration. So you have a certain companies that offer a service that used to be done by the state. When you buy a new car, instead of going from a car dealer and then to a state office to register you can just do it at the car registration. So that's called a channel partnership. The other type of network is a civic switchboard. This is just a group, formal and informal group of like-minded organizations that get together and start collaborating. Sometimes the state doesn't have to involve a lot of money. For example, you can get the food banks in a poor neighborhood and sort of organize them together and have them collaborate. So sometimes they can share best practice, stories of what happened and so on. They can share food sometimes if one has more supplies and one doesn't have more supply. And it don't necessarily need contracts, don't necessarily need money. Sometimes just having a community leader or a mayor or someone get involved is enough to get a civic switchboard to work. And the last type of network is the one where the state is less involved, is information dissemination. So for example, if the state wants to get more information out to senior citizens, it might choose to enter into a partnership with senior citizens groups and then have them like disseminate information on their newsletter or so on. In determining the right type, in choosing one of these types of network, you have 3 main questions that we will ask. The first is the need ongoing or one-time? If it's a one-time need, for example, a response to the year 2000 problem, where you need to mobilize the entire society, and the government needs to make sure that private and public organizations have done enough to prevent this problem, then you'll set up a network. It will most likely be ad hoc, and then once there's no longer need, you'll disband the network. The other thing is, the question is, how much money do you have? If you don't have much money, then you'll tend to select a network where the government is less involved than if you have more money to spend. And then third is what is the relative importance of accountability and flexibility in your network. If you want everyone in the network, the entire chain, to be accountable, you will tend to have very detailed contracts with all the actors. And you'll tend to have detailed KPIs or key performance indicators with those actors, and you'll need an enforcement mechanism and measurement mechanism. This can get complicated, and it will increase the transaction costs between the parties. If you need more flexibility, actually, then you might have much, more informal type of networking and more looser types of collaboration.